Hello and welcome to another spoiler episode about Umineko. This video is going to contain full spoilers for the whole game. This is for the end of episode 1, but is going to involve information from way at the end of the game. Do not watch if you haven't played it. You won't even know what I'm talking about. And as I said, we're going to be covering the final two parts of the first episode. Not the tea party and question mark stuff, that comes next. But for now, just the actual end of the episode proper. And the wrapping up of the first weekend on Rokkenjima. Or the first fragment, I suppose. Content warnings in general for this episode for murder, blood, and mutilating of corpses. Content warning in specific sections for references to child abuse. None of them are particularly going to be discussed in depth. Some visuals will show blood, just as a heads up. An interesting note just way at the start, when they're talking about being worried about poisoning and wanting to get food and get fresh food that they know nobody has touched, that they can all literally watch being prepared and so forth. It's funny the gravity that a single culprit theory has for everyone, because the initial Twilight, the first Twilight, kills 6 people every time, which is a huge, this is serious, this is big, someone is capable of orchestrating 6 deaths from the jump. It makes a meaningful impact compared to if they discovered 1 person dead. That would be significant, but is on a whole other level when a third of the party is immediately killed. And a reasonable explanation for this is that there is not a singular culprit, but that is an explanation that nobody likes because it implicates that not just one person they know has betrayed their trust, but that multiple people have been willing to do such a thing. In that sense, believing that a singular person used some nefarious method to overpower a large group of people is a comfort because it allows them to feel as though they don't have to actually worry about a singular person who has the power to take on 6 people. Even though, if you wanted to be strictly logical, you should assume that multiple people would have carried this out. And they do allude to that earlier when they're talking about reasonably how could a single person have moved all these corpses, done all this stuff, staging and so forth, in the middle of the night, all by themselves. One small thing that I think is of interesting note, even if I don't think there's a large conclusion to be drawn from it, is the way the different characters use different pronouns when they refer to Beatrice and the culprit, and how those don't always align. I know that in the original Japanese, the kind of usage of pronouns is a different thing, because I am not knowledgeable in Japanese, but I know that the honorifics are used, which do tend to be gendered. They don't translate neatly to English, so they're not always present, and they're sometimes replaced by English pronouns, which not always a strictly realistic thing, but I am only going to be able to go off of the English text I am given, and translating makes choices that are meaningful, whether they're intended or not. And the thing I find meaningful is the way in which, especially different characters, will use they for a culprit when they don't know who the culprit is, but someone like Battler will often refer to he or that bastard. Battler is gendering the culprit, even as he separately genders Beatrice as she, her. And you can even see this sometimes in certain situations where one sentence will refer to the culprit and say he, and then the next will refer to Beatrice and say she, which creates a divide between these two separate persons, and in one sense is constructing a person who is the culprit, and different characters construct them differently. Jessica, for instance, preferring to use they for the culprit because she doesn't know what the culprit's gender is, and she doesn't presume the same kind of gendered assumption Battler does. When everyone starts interrogating Genji about Beatrice, there's a fun thing where he is extremely reserved, as he tends to be, but he's also extremely tight-lipped. The whole story of Beatrice has a lot going on, and I'm not sure how much Genji knows about original Beatrice, but he sure as hell knows a lot about future Beatrices. And he's very tight-lipped because, though he has lots of information he could tell, there's a lot of it that, like with Maria, if he did tell it, they would not be happy about it, and they might even deny or reject what he says out of hand, and start to suspect that maybe he's gunning for some end as opposed to just faithfully retelling things as far as he's aware. So it's interesting that he waits, listening, taking in a lot of what they say for quite a while, before he'll admit something very broad that is applicable to multiple Beatrices, which is just that he had feelings of deep love for her, and that he cared for her more than his late wife. Given, generally speaking, how he doesn't seem to have cared much for his late wife, that doesn't seem that difficult. He does specify that he has heard that she passed away before the mansion was completed. That obviously applies to original Beatrice, and the implication then here also seems to be that Genji's referring to her as someone he didn't know personally. So the implication being that she was either before his time, or that Kinzo was keeping her so secret Genji had no awareness of her. And it's worth noting that when Genji does speak, he speaks with a significant degree of empathy with Kinzo's situation. He has a very generous read of Kinzo and the situation he was in with original Beatrice. We'll get into that more when we get to episode 7, probably over a year, maybe 2 from now. And this generous interpretation spreads. Like, he tells it as a story where you can be empathetic to Kinzo, even as a person you might not like or think is a bit of a terror. You can hear this story and be like, truly sad how this man loved this woman and just wanted nothing more than to be with her again, so much so that it drove him to the ends of the earth and drove him to this whole hobby. In this moment, everyone can feel the empathy with Kinzo because of the way the narrative is being framed by Genji as a sincere love, and a kind of sincere love that people can easily get behind. And it takes Natsuhi to point out how this really sucks for his late wife. I find it a funny detail that the reason people can be sympathetic to Kinzo, who's cheating on his wife, is because his wife is only a minor part of Genji's story. Genji will refer to his relative feelings for his late wife without going into any detail, and this reflects the greater Umineko as a whole, because this is about as much as we'll ever know about Kinzo's wife, and everyone's mother. They will offhandedly refer to her, but she's not even a presence in the way that Beatrice is a presence in this first episode. She's not even a minor presence the way Beatrice is. Maria's absentee father has much more of a presence. In fact, there is a spot at the table set for him that he is not occupying. There's no such spot for Kinzo's late wife. She is just gone. She is given up on and she has been excised. And I do think part of why people are willing to buy in with this story and extrapolate from it based on Genji's very scant details is because it fits a mold of truth that people already have in their own heads. People can project their own understanding of a situation. They can think about the people they love, and they can then extrapolate from that how they would feel and pretty quickly put together a coherent thread from Genji's very brief explanation. It is based on Genji's brief words that Jessica starts to say, oh, I had it all wrong. I thought all the servants were brainwashed, but actually what you're trying to do was be supportive of an old man and his lost love. She imbues a lot of romanticism in the idea of Beatrice that Genji does not suggest and doesn't even agree to, particularly. They instead put a lot of meaning on his words and actions and presume a lot of stuff without the actual benefit of Genji then saying yes or no, because he is very reserved and is not saying a lot. especially when it comes to the iterations of Beatrice. In particular, one thing I did want to say about the idea that people are willing to believe this very quickly because of existing truths and narratives in their own heads is that part of the incongruity of believing in Beatrice is that it is trying to impose a narrative that they can't fit. The idea that there could be another person on the island without there being another body is just inconceivable to most of the Shuramiya family. And in their inability to connect the dots, they reject the narrative wholesale and instead view it with a lot of suspicion. Even though you could pretty reasonably be suspicious of Genji's loving portrayal of Kinzo for a man who a lot of people tend to describe as a terror. This story also having a lot of people empathize with Kinzo about how they've denied Beatrice is pretty fucked up when they care about the feelings of a rich old white man who's angry about his lost love and unintentionally are just disregarding the feelings of a vulnerable queer person of lower class than them who serves their family directly and has also had to hear them repeatedly deny the witch Beatrice. And not just deny her as a person, but to utterly undermine the notion that it could be a reasonable thing to ever believe she exists. The rejection of Beatrice is not simply a no, it is a firm and vehement no. And I do feel like this is being sideways lampshaded by the fact that they spend all this time empathizing with Ginzo, and there's a very brief addendum where Natsuhi then empathizes with his wife. And that parallels with the fact that no one's empathizing with the servant who is also Beatrice. And I do feel like this gets a little bit reiterated when George has a short monologue where he talks about loving a woman and how he can relate to this situation and how a group of people can collectively agree to something and make it the truth, and that he quite directly says this is magic. This is how magic works. But again, he can only apply it to Kinzo's situation and is still unable to listen to Maria. Maria straight up says, This is what I've been telling you. This is what magic is. It's real. But none of you are listening to me. And to pick apart a certain section, Genji gets directly asked, has there ever been any rumors about a child between Beatrice and grandfather? And he says, no. He's never heard of anything like that. I have to assume that this is a white lie where one of two things is happening. Either he is technically answering the question by saying, well, there's no rumors about this. Because even though it happened and that he knows for definite that it did in fact happen, it is not a rumor because no one talks about it. It is not a story that is spread because it was kept so hidden that no one was even aware. The alternative being a different kind of white lie where Genji is technically answering a different question about a different Beatrice and not the original Beatrice. Which I think is less likely, but would at least be thematically satisfying in using the ambiguity of Beatrice as a person and a shared name. When Natsuhi is waving a gun and pointing it at all of the servants and Maria, there's an interesting underlining of motivation. Kumasawa asks, "You're making a mistake, milady. Why would I do something like that?" Kumasawa does not have the motivation to do this kind of thing. And she is trying to underline that as a proof of her own innocence. Because the why behind the murders explains a lot if you understand it. What I find funny then is, shortly after, Genji says, If by suspecting me you recognize me as the master's greatest servant, then I count it a great honor, regardless of the circumstances." He then denies putting the letter there, but he has already revealed why he has the motivation to enact murders. He is a servant who considers serving itself to be a great honor. he would absolutely carry out orders from a master who wanted him to do these things. Which Natsuhi does find intensely suspicious, but kind of for the wrong reason, in that she cannot understand this motivation and insists it must not be true. She asks if he expects her to believe that. Because though Natsuhi has not lived as a servant, she has lived as subservient to her husband and the Ashuramiya family as a whole. She has been lesser than them and has gotten no respect or recognition, and so she doesn't have pride in it. She's only able to have pride this episode when she, via Kinzo, gives herself a pep talk. And I think it is also relevant that the servants are below her. She does use them as a punching bag. She will criticize servants when they mess up because it reflects poorly on her, but she's criticizing them because she is able to, and not able to criticize her exceedingly rude guests who are above her in the pecking order. So for this reason, she does not empathize properly with Genji's quite sincere feelings about his position, and insists that he must be lying instead of being able to see that what he's saying is true and still reflects why he fits as a culprit. Maria continues to hammer the point home by asking them straight up, what do you people want? Do you want Beatrice to exist so you don't need to suspect anyone? Or do you want to deny Beatrice and accept that there is a human culprit? Because you only seem to believe in a human culprit when you want to attack them with violence. People are not actually interested in a truth. People are interested in soothing their feelings. They either want to believe in Beatrice so they don't need to believe that someone has betrayed them, or they want to believe that there is a human that they can find and bring to justice to feel better about the people they have lost. Natsuhi's response is really not much of a rebuttal, because she says to Maria that she doesn't want to label her as the culprit, but there is no doubt that Maria enjoys making the situation unpleasant and providing assistance to the enemy. Providing assistance, I won't dispute, but I don't think Maria's trying to make the situation unpleasant at all. I in fact think Maria's just trying to regularly get across a message to people that no one is listening to. And when none of them can understand it, they can again only impose their own understanding of, were they in Maria's shoes, why they would do such a thing. And I don't know about you, but I feel like were I in this bizarre situation, I would still understand Maria's sincerity even if I didn't understand what she was trying to communicate to me. And with this letter, which has conveniently a little magic circle in it revealing discord, it is used to drive a wedge so that the group split up, so that the culprit Beatrice can continue murdering people without being seen. It is interesting to me that, again, Beatrice continues to make the point that when people are scared, they will make brutal decisions. Everyone in the moment is willing to kick Maria out. They find their ways to rationalize it. But at the end of the day, they are sending out a 9-year-old child, who none of them thinks is the murderer. No one believes she is a culprit. They only suspect she is somehow aiding the culprit. But they will still kick her out, and they do feel regret in the aftermath, to varying degrees, but they still do it. And this is what people will do when their backs are against the wall. And the thing I find funny is Battler refers to this as throwing out the suspicious ones in such a lawless way. Will we still have the right to defy the lawlessness of the witch? And as someone who thinks that morality and laws are not very well linked, it is funny to me that his concern is about laws more than it is about doing the right thing and being moral. And obviously the reason for this is that a lot of people think of laws as the baseline morality for society and civility. That the reason society functions is that people will follow these agreed upon laws, and that will make people civil to each other and prevent things from going disastrous. I feel like this is relevantly connected to everyone's assumption that once the police arrive, things will just be completely sorted out, and that they won't need to worry anymore, the correct culprit will be found and dealt with, and everything will be over. Because we know that won't happen. We know that, in theory, kicking out 4 people from a room where they're safe is not illegal in the slightest, but it is immoral. And I think it is a little bit laughable and related that Natsuhi's defense for what she's doing is she is sorry that what she is doing is quite rude. Not dangerous, not threatening their lives, it's rude. As if she's just kicking them out of a party. And that she will take responsibility if this is a mistake. What does taking responsibility look like? She is kicking these 4 people out. And no matter who you think the culprit is, she does not think all of them are the culprit. The likelihood is one of them is going to die. At which point, the deed is done. Just like magic cannot repair a vase, just like magic cannot revive someone and keep them alive, once that person has died, they have died. You cannot fix it. The only responsibility you can take is apologizing, acknowledging that you made a mistake. But this is a cold comfort to these people. And especially in a situation where Natsuhi is going to be safe. As far as they're concerned, Natsuhi is protected where she is. And she is sending those people out and only giving them the assurance that she will acknowledge her mistake if it does indeed prove to be a mistake. And spoilers, we know that it does. All 3 of them, the 3 of them, but not Maria, all die. And that is Natsuhi's fault. But there is no responsibility she can take that will fix the situation. Natsuhi and Genji have an exchange here that has a few key lines. Natsuhi says that she will leave them all in Genji's hands. He replies with a very reserved certainly, and boy, are they left in his hands. He, being the one who enacts the 6th, 7th, and 8th Twilights, he does indeed take care of them all. And there's a very curious line from Genji. He says he has already received the Master's favor. Everything he has done until today has been in repayment for that. What does he mean by that? Everything he has done until today. The day when all the murders have happened. So I wonder what today has been in repayment for. And to whom? We then get the line where Battler acknowledges that no, actually he didn't lose Maria's little scorpion charm. He was just lying. He'd be too polite to ever lose a gift from a little girl like her, but he is not too polite to lie to her to try and win a debate that he is failing at. Battler turning around the chessboard on the letter is very funny because it shows how pretty bad he is at turning the chessboard around. He only goes one level of thought deep. Why would one of the servants put the letter down? Because it will only make them seem suspicious, and then we'd kick them out. The answer being, of course, that is exactly what the culprit wants. They do come to that realization as, oh, an external culprit wants these people out so they can be murdered. But that applies just as well to, oh, someone in the room wanted to split us up so they could continue doing murders without being blatantly observed. Earlier on, Battler kind of realized he couldn't just continuously spin the chessboard around and do these kind of double negatives because you would get nowhere, because endlessly you could claim... You could basically keep escalating the spins and saying, well, if you know that this would be the move that makes sense, you then do this other move. But if you knew that that would make sense, and so forth. The moment where all the kids convince Natsuhi that they should leave Kinzo's study and go after and protect Maria too is really good. Because it cuts to the core of Natsuhi's motivation. In an earlier video, I did mention the ways in which Natsuhi was, unlike Ava, protecting everyone. She didn't divide a line between the family and others, the way that Ava very quickly did with a very small group of people. And the kids quite directly acknowledge and appreciate that in Natsuhi. They give her the kind of appreciation she normally doesn't get from anyone. And talk about the emotional legwork involved in all of this too. Because they acknowledge that everyone's drained. This has been a rough day. And she was still doing work to make sure people were looked after and doing okay. And no one appreciates that at the best of times. So to have them in this moment acknowledge and appreciate it is very good, especially because of the ways in which they're highlighting how she did start carving a line and saying Maria is on the outside and she is not a part of the family I will protect. And all of the kids trying to basically empathize with her position, convince her that Maria should not have been kicked out like that. What's interesting is that none of the kids bring up the servants as a concern in this situation. Now, you could reasonably argue that they merely want to do enough to get Natsuhi to leave the room and to not be paranoid and aggressive when they do. But it still feels somewhat lacking that their concern is focused so wholly on Maria and indicates that there's still some paranoia and mistrust towards the servants. I like George's supposition that there's some sort of icepick firing gun that the culprit has, because from later episodes we'll know that the icepicks are kind of like props. They're crappy little things that were bought for cheap and are not actually mystical artifacts of any kind, but they are used in the staging of scenes that gives them a kind of weight that people have not been second guessing. Because of the way the scene is constructed, there's the logical assumption that the murder weapon is the obvious weapon stuck in each of the people. Just like there's the assumption that people must have died when in the order they were discovered. Later, we can see the ways in which people can be killed out of order, but the twilights can be made to match by basically delaying when the bodies get discovered. And likewise, will be shown that you can kill people as much as you want with magic as long as the final act leaves them with the stake in the right place, then the ceremony is fine. At the end of the day, what people observe and see is the twilight itself. The act of killing them, putting the stake in them, that's not as important as the observation of those things. Which is why the staging is so important and so meticulously done every time they discover a body. And what's funny about it is that the gravity of this assumption is so powerful that they will even believe in icepick firing guns before they will believe in magic. Battler throwing a candle stand against the wall and saying, "Why wouldn't Maria react to the violence of a sound like that?" shows the depths of Battler's inability to empathize with a girl he knows is being abused, but cannot understand the life she has lived as a result. A candle stand hitting the wall? Why would she react to that? She didn't get hit, and she so often does. In the final text scroll, first I'm going to mention a fun thing, which is just something I looked up on a whim just because I was curious, but the stakes are all tied to demons, so specifically one of the 70-something demons, I forget the exact number, but they all represent the 7 deadly sins, so I did the obvious thing. And here's what each of them is. Ava, stabbed by Asmodeus, was lust. Hideyoshi, stabbed by Beelzebub, was gluttony. Kinzo, stabbed by Mammon, was greed. Kanon, stabbed by Satan, was wrath. Genji, stabbed by Lucifer, was pride, which I find slightly surprising, but does make sense. Nanjo, stabbed by Belphegor, was sloth, which left Kumasawa, stabbed by Leviathan, as envy, which I find interesting. Based on who the people are, at the very least in this episode, I don't take these stakes to be necessarily judgments of their character. I don't think being stabbed in this way necessarily means that this person has done such a great sin in this regard. I definitely think that's true for some of these people, but I wouldn't really be willing to commit to a read that says that Genji is being criticized for his pride, because though he is certainly a prideful person, I couldn't possibly connect the dots on the idea that Beatrice, who is enacting the murders, would be criticizing him for his pride that allowed him to enact his master's wishes. Unless maybe, I guess, you wanted to make some sort of read about how he shouldn't have been so proud of enacting Kinzo's will because of how shitty Kinzo was. But again, I think that's a step too far. I'm curious to see how these shake up in later episodes, because for the most part I can just see the elements of their character. Kumasawa's one is funny. I don't quite get that. Who is she envying? Is she envying someone's youth? Is she possibly envying the theoretically elevated position of Kinzo's grandchild? Neither particularly makes sense, but it's a curious thought. In the final text scrawl, I do gotta shout out how ineffectual the police are. After everyone being certain the police would sort everything out once they arrived, they don't find the corpses of the children. They find some unimaginably gruesome body parts, and they just concluded that basically everyone must have died. Everyone's chances of survival were hopelessly dim. Now, you might say, be fair, the entire island blew up. How could they realistically have found much in that crime scene? To which I will follow up with two things. One, Battler's body got off that island and they never found him. We'll get to that way in the future, but there was a survivor that they never got a hint of. Obviously that's a complicated situation. Point 2 for the police being inept is a line I love. It was one of the rare instances where a corpse was identified thanks to dental records. Pretty rare instance, huh? Almost as if a lot of the forensics around crime scene investigations are not actually ironclad, indisputable evidence, but are often ways of putting together a narrative of understanding what happened. This isn't me trying to say there's literally no basis for any of it. There's a lot of stuff that gets dressed up as if it is indisputable facts that no one could deny, when actually what you're looking at is, you're just trying to get your best understanding of a situation, using some technologies and so forth, but it is often very squishy and messy. And in some cases, like with lie detectors, is not really true at all and is in fact totally unreliable. But it's all scientific and logical, of course, which is why everyone believes that it'll be sorted out by the police in the end. I have some thoughts on authorship too, which is going to be a major theme across the whole game, but I think I will talk about that after the tea party. So for now, the time has come for me to answer some final questions, and then state my blue text of what I think has happened in episode 1 of Umineko. Not a lot actually really needs to be answered in this final part. I think there's one question that's in significant dispute, but a couple other than quite simple ones. So, who placed the letter in Kinzo's study? I think it was just Maria. Maria herself mentions that Beatrice cannot come in there, but she can send a familiar to do her bidding. Maria is the one who points out that the letter is there. Which, in reading the line, I don't believe Maria as much of an actor, but I could also believe Maria is very good at reciting lines she is given. She reads Beatrice's letter at the dinner party very well, so if she was told to place a letter, step back, and then say, "Oh, a letter from Beatrice," then I think she could pull that off. Convincingly enough, especially because, by all accounts, she seems like she's got a kind of monotone voice in certain ways. I think theoretically you could believe Kumasawa or Nanjo had put it there, but now that I've gotten to the ending, I'm not convinced either of them are active participants. I think they are, to an extent, aware of things that are happening, and I think they have not contradicted the narrative that Genji and Kanon put forward, but neither of them are totally complicit. Possibly Nanjo. You'll hear my blue text soon. Secondly, who enacted the 6th, 7th, and 8th Twilights? That was Genji. A man proud to serve to the end, he would happily take on the final sacrifices, commit them, and in fact, Genji himself being the 6th Twilight, to me implies a degree of trickery in and of itself that makes me more convinced he did the deed, because it implies that Genji was killed before the other two, which would make one think, well, it couldn't be Genji then. But, in fact, I think it was. And the key to how this is set up is that, I believe, Beatrice is using the still living body of Kanon/Shannon, and was the one who staged the scene after Genji had killed them all. Because someone still needed to put those stakes in place, because those stakes did not kill anybody. The final question that is slightly more contentious. What happened in Natsuhi's duel? Why did Natsuhi seemingly shoot herself? And I think the answer to this, the key to the answer here, is the letter. The letter that the kids do not find, but that Natsuhi sees and reads. And I think a key to my understanding of this is to somewhat reject the scene we see of Natsuhi going into the hallway and shouting for Beatrice and accepting the duel. Because, in reality, I don't think that's how it went down. Because I think that letter was Beatrice explaining her origin, and more specifically, explaining Natsuhi's hand in her origin. Natsuhi pushed the servant with Kinzo's grandchild, causing a servant to die and a baby to fall, but survive and be whisked away. Natsuhi rejected that baby's ability to grow up as part of the Ciconia family. Even as a baby, Natsuhi was unable to accept that person. In a certain respect, and especially one could frame it this way in a letter to Natsuhi, she is the cause of what happened to the entire family that night. She perpetuated this disaster. If you were to ask me, I'd lay the blame more at Kinzo's feet, but him already being dead, I would defer to Natsuhi as being a key instigator of Beatrice's awful life. Having seen this, knowing that Natsuhi still thinks about that time, and still presumably feels guilt about it, it is not hard to think that she could be compelled to shoot herself on account of this. You might think that shooting herself with a rifle could be difficult, but the tips and general information do make it clear that the gun can be operated one-handed. So in fact it would actually be possible to one-handedly shoot it yourself. More importantly, a wrinkle is about the letter disappearing, but again I think this is the hand of Beatrice, in the living body, taking away that letter. I think that body, having been badly injured in the boiler room, is probably not up to a fight, which is why I don't think there was any kind of struggle where maybe she took the gun away from Natsuhi, but she was capable enough of retrieving the letter so that none of the kids saw it, leaving only Natsuhi's body, and then Beatrice disappeared into the shadows until the kids could arrive, and she could have a moment with Maria, and a good laugh. So, here is what I think happened overall. And I'm probably wrong, but I plan to declare this, put out this episode, and then start looking at some of the comments on previous videos and poking into the spoilers that I've refrained from until now. On the first Twilight, Genji and Kanon got up in the middle of the night, went over, and killed the 6 original victims. Killing Shannon involved taking a body of a previous Beatrice and dressing it up. and placing them all in the shutter. When it comes to the second twilight, the closed room was voluntarily opened by Eva and Hideyoshi, at which point Genji could kill them both, stage the scenes such that they were impossible to see from the door, then leave the room and create the narrative with Kanon and with Kumasawa that the room was sealed with a latch, when in fact it wasn't. There is a possibility that the latch was made to look as if it was sealed, and Kanon acted as if he snipped it. There are some lines that do support this, where it seems like cutting through it was very easy. Surprisingly easy, I believe is the wording. But either way, the room was not truly sealed, and they only fake opened it to then discover an impossible tableau. Next, Kanon dashed into the boiler room and injured himself in an attempt to spoil Beatrice's game. However, he did not die. Nanjo examined him and they took his body away, though even when being taken away, people did not particularly think things looked good. And they declared Kanon dead, but the text of the game does not definitively say his body is dead, only that Kanon never regained consciousness. At this point, I believe Nanjo is in some way implicated. I do not have a very good understanding of the motivation involved, aside from potentially some guilt over Beatrice's situation and Nanjo's complicity in protecting Kinzo. Of course, Kinzo was already dead. He was placed in the furnace and had a stake placed in him to enact a twilight, but no murder ever had to take place. Which leaves us with the letter in the room, the 6th, 7th, and 8th twilights, and Natsuhi's duel, all of which I explained up front. I enjoy this solution. I do feel there are slightly clumsy holes. I'm curious about the ways in which people could be complicit without being culprits. In some ways, to me, it feels messy to have that bleed of having people who would be involved without directly being culprits, and how convenient it can be to say that Maria was helping but not a culprit. Kumasawa complied with an alibi without contradicting them or actually helping, and that Nanjo in some way was helpful in declaring Kanon's death, but without otherwise being an active participant. So that's where I think things stand. I'm curious to now dig into what some other people have said and rethink things. My next spoiler episode is going to cover the tea party and the other tea party, and depending on the comments themselves, I may revisit the events of the murders and give some sort of indications. Also, in combing over the tea party text again, I might have some thoughts of my own, but I don't expect to spend too long on it. But this episode has run pretty long. Thank you for joining me on this whole journey of episode 1 of Umineko. We're just about 1/8 of the way there. So, thank you for watching. See you next time.